In this video, I want to take a look at Studio One's features that we can use to slice and chop up any audio that we've brought in, whether you're someone who just likes to work with field samples and you want to kind of, cut those up and use them in a sampler or a drum sampler, or whether you are someone who does hip hop where you like to take samples and chop them and then create your drum tracks along with those. I just want to cover all of the different ways that we can do this and some of the features within Studio One that will hopefully make the process go a little bit quicker, and maybe you'll see some things that you didn't know were available. So to start, I just want to show the most simplest of ways that we can accomplish this. And then as we go along, we'll go into some of the deeper features and functions and the way that we can get this done. If you've ever done any searching online, there's a million different videos on this and different people do it different ways, but hopefully we'll cover each of the features so within Studio One 3, so then you can take what you want to use for your method, or maybe you'll see something that works even better for you. So enough of the rambling. Let's just start with the most basic of basic ways that we can get this done. It takes less than 30 seconds here. And right now I've got a basic audio event here. It's just a simple guitar recording, and it's pretty straightforward. So this is going to be really easy because we've got our guitar pluck, I guess you would call it, on each beat. It's pretty matched up with our tempo. So if I play back, there's not much that we need to worry about with this. But again, we'll get deeper and work with something a bit more complicated in a second here. But just to show you how we would chop this up in just a few seconds is if we come to open up the bend panel here, and then we'll want to come to the quantize and click this drop down menu, choose slice, and then by default this is on quantize. I'm going to take that off. Right here we have auto fades and it's set for 10 milliseconds. We can come in and put in our own value that we'd like. And this is basically going to create a little crossfade at the beginning and end of each slice point so that we can avoid any clicks and pops in our audio, say if we were to then transfer the samples to a sampler or drum machine. We don't need to have that on if we don't want. So at this point, all we need to do is select our file, our audio event, and then apply it, and we're done. It's now sliced up into individual audio events. And then what we can do now is we can load this into one of Studio One's VST instruments. It will work with the audio events. It's from the same company. We need to do one other step if we want to use it in a third-party VST, but we'll cover that in a second. But if I wanted to load these into, say, we'll just say Impact for an example, then I can just select all of these. I'll open up the Impact here and then just grab that first one, drag it onto the first cell there. And now we're in business. So then I can trigger my pads and we're done. It's pretty straightforward, easy, very simple. If you are going to be working with Impact, just quickly know that you can come up to the waveform display here and adjust. You can see this isn't quite lined up just right. We can then adjust where we start and end with these samples. I'll select the next cell and let's move that forward to the transient. And we can move that back a bit. Come to the next one, adjust here, and move that up a bit. So I'll trigger this with my external controller. Okay, now we could have also taken a bit more time to adjust the bend markers to get these more lined up, and maybe we'll take a quick look at that and then go a little bit deeper now. So Now, if we'd like to have finer control of where our bend markers are going at the transients within our audio, what we could do is select our audio event. We can then analyze it and create these bend markers. Keep in mind, we can choose a couple of different methods here. We can choose the standard. We also have a sensitive. If we choose that and analyze, then we're going to get a lot more. Keep in mind that we have this threshold over here though. So if we turn this down, then we're going to lose our bend markers. If we go up, we're going to get more. And this is helpful for if you're working with a more complicated audio event, say a drum track. But I'm just going to go back to the standard and take that down. Now, getting even more control over where these bend markers are, we can expand out and then press 7, get the bend tool, and we can hold down Alt and then drag these freely wherever we'd like without worrying about stretching or compressing our audio. And the reason why this is important, because these bend markers are not only used to stretch and compress our audio, they're also used as the slice points when we are slicing our audio. So this is going to give you more precise control. And we can click anywhere we'd like when the bend tool is selected and add bend markers wherever we'd like. We can then right click and delete on markers that we don't want. So I'm going to come back out. Let's take a look at a bit more complicated sound or track. I'm going to F9 and bring up the browser and bring in one of my old tracks from back in the day. And let's just solo this and hear what we're going to be working with. I'm going to zoom back out. So this is our track, and it leads me to a couple other things that I wanted to mention that are important to take note when you're working with your audio in Studio One. If I come to the sample rate here and click once, come to the song setup, notice that I have stretch audio files to song tempo. So if you want to bring in audio files or other songs and then work with those, slicing them up and chopping up your audio without having it altered when you bring it in, you want to be sure that you've got stretch audio files to song tempo deselected. Now this is only going to apply for songs that have audio or BPM tempo information embedded within the file. So if it doesn't, then Studio One's not going to do anything until you manually do something yourself. But this particular track that I brought in doesn't have anything because it was made so long ago. Well, not too long ago, but there is no BPM information, so we don't have to worry about that. Another thing to keep in mind is that if I F4 and bring up our inspector, you want to also take note of the tempo area here. This is important when we're working with our audio files as well. And if you do have that stretch audio files upon import selected, what you can do is create an audio track and then just be sure that you have don't follow or follow on before you bring the file into that track. If we have time stretch, then it's going to stretch it if it has tempo information contained within it. Now, if you happen to be doing the old school way of hooking up a record player and then bringing in, recording that audio into here, then you're not going to have the BPM information attached. So how can we go about working with samples that we don't know what the tempo is? I'm going to F4 and close out that inspector. What we can do, one method is we can, so if I start playback again, what I'm going to do is tap the tempo of this out, and hopefully I can catch it. And then we're going to set Studio One's tempo to the audio, the song that we brought in, and then I'm going to add the tempo that we found. You'll see. We'll just go ahead here. And this leads to something else. I'm going to F4 and bring up the inspector, and we want to be sure that we have don't follow on, because otherwise our audio event is going to keep jumping around whenever the tempo changes. Okay, so this has to be 80 beats per minute. It's just jumping around because I'm not keeping tempo. So then what we would want to do is I'll F4. We can, and at this point, we're matched up to the tempo of the track that we brought in, and we can then just use that tempo and build the rest of our track around that tempo if we want to do it that way. But if we'd like to, if we don't have a problem with adjusting, time stretching this track that we brought in, then one thing that we can do is come to the, be sure that we've got that selected, come to the inspector, and then you see this file tempo not set. We could also right click on it, file tempo not set. Double click, I'll put in 80, and now we have a tempo assigned to this audio event. And at this point we can then just come to the first beat of the track. I'll expand out a bit here, put that there. My snap is off. I'm going to turn the click track on and let's hear how that sounds. See if it's matched up. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time. That's pretty good there. Now we can take whatever we'd like. I'm going to turn the snap back on by pressing in. We can also click that icon up there. Come back out a bit, and let's just say I would like a 3 and bring up the razor tool. I'll just take this section here. We'll delete the rest out, and actually I'll bring in all of this. I'll bring this portion back. Okay, now we can come back to the slice area here. We've got it selected. I'll just apply. Now that's a lot of slices that we have going on there. So what I'm going to do is Control Z to undo that. And then I want to analyze in standard mode. We'll zoom in a bit. Now, one thing you can, whatever track you have selected or event, we can actually tab to our bend markers using tab on our keyboard. And then in this way, we can see what Studio One has done here. So actually, maybe I'll F7 and bring up the bend tool. I'll delete that one out. And other than that, I think it's pretty good. So now I will slice that up. And let's zoom back out. Now I'm sure many of you have your own particular VST that you like to work with your samples in. So how can we get it into that VST? There's a couple other extra steps that will involve, but it will only take a few seconds. So first we want to select all of our samples, and then we will Control Alt B to bounce these to a new track. And what this does is when we have these on another track after a bounce down, we've created separate audio files on our hard drive for each one, because when we're working with the events, we just they're references to the original audio file. And this is why they can load into a VST that Studio One has made, because it's all their proprietary format and they're designed to work together. But if we want a third-party VST, then we need to bounce those down, create the extra audio files on our hard drive, and then at that point we can then bring it into another VST. So what I'll do now is F9, come to my file browser, and then you need to go to wherever your this is slicing audio. This is the file, as you can see up top here, slicing audio. This is the folder for this particular song that I'm working on. Bounces. We created those new bounces, and you can see that they are all here as waves. So I'm just going to grab this first group here, select the top one, hold down Shift, grab the bottom one. I'll bring up battery. Start from the top here. So we need to start from the top so that it will fill down as we go. You can see how we can then bring them into whatever sampler that we would like after we've bounced them down to another track and created those individual samples on the hard drive, because that's the important step that we need to do before we can bring them into another sampler, a third-party sampler. I'm going to just close out of there. One other way that we could have accessed those audio files besides going to the browser there is just by, if we right click, we can select in the pool and then show and Explorer or Finder for the Mac. Then it will show all of these, and then you can just drag the ones that you want directly onto the sampler that you're using. Now, the last couple of things that I want to mention is if you're not concerned about getting the BPM or the tempo of the audio that you're bringing in, you just want to chop those samples up, you can skip the whole tap tempo process that we went through and just go ahead and use the analyze and then the threshold to adjust the bend markers, or go in and manually add them or delete them yourself. You know, there's a ton of different options that you can do this, and now that you've seen the tools, just you can choose the way that works best for you. Also, after we added the file tempo in and found out what it was by using the tap tempo, we could then raise the tempo of Studio One up to whatever we'd like, 120, 140, 160, and then it will time stretch that audio. As long as you have time, you want to turn that back on after you found the tempo, choose time stretch, and then it's going to adjust that audio file to be the tempo that you actually want to work with within the song, if you want to have something different than what the actual tempo of the sample that you're working with. So I hope that makes sense. In a future video, I'm going to go over the bend panel here in great detail and go over quantizing audio, working with the bend markers and stretching, compressing your audio, and just go into a bit more depth. But I wanted to go ahead and put something together to show the functionality that Studio One has when you're working with slicing and chopping up audio files.